today's presentation. We will be leaving the last 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A. As always, we invite you to stay engaged in the chat. Any thoughts that arise, please drop them in the chat. Any questions that arise along the way, Brianne, our speaker, will try and keep track of them just depending on where she is in her flow, and may respond to you in the moment, or we may hold it till the very end for that Q&A period. But rest assured, you will get a chance to kind of discuss whatever it is you're wondering about today's content. So with that, let me introduce today's speaker and topic. And today we actually, we went, I think, our farthest step away from transportation by asking an architectural firm to present for us. And like I said on the first day, this more than any of our other presentations thus far, I think is where we would ask that you relieve yourself of the pressure to think that these are short-term responses. Architecture, I think, more than anything, speaks to dreaming to the long horizon of what a workplace and workspace can be, and then, what transportation plan follows that. So again, also to say that we haven't made this kind of a star of this week, but tomorrow is Earth Day. And I think architecture and how we think about sustainability really is a long-term conversation. How do we really take a look at what the future horizon is like? And by kind of keeping our eyes on the future, it really helps us gain clarity. If that's the future of a workplace we want for our company, our workplace, our organization, what is the clarity we need on what we need to do today? And so it's really exciting for us to just really experiment and invite Omgivning to present to us. And with that, I'll present Brianne Hunter. She is a project manager with vast professional experience across workplace and commercial design, architecture, and construction. As a key team leader at Omgivning, she is focused on workplace environments and the blending of user needs that come from both working, living, and engaging space. As a believer in strong collaborative relationships, Brianne works diligently to see that design solutions are realistic and that every design is sustainable and grounded in wellness principles for the end user and the environment. So with that, I will hand it off to Brianne and take it away. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I am going to hopefully let me know if we've got the screen share up. Let me know if we're good.
Looks great, Brianne.
Okay. All right. So first of all, hang on, I'm just getting one thing sorted out here. Okay. So thank you, Verada. Thank you for having us. As she said, I am Brianne Hunter. I'm a project manager with Omgivning, an architecture and interior design firm based in downtown Los Angeles. And we're so excited to be here with you today. Thank you for coming and attending. And I appreciate the fact that this is a little bit outside the box for perhaps what you would typically be looking at or considering. But, to Verada's earlier point, I think it, perhaps gives you a glimpse of what is possible in the future and what we might be seeing in our immediate near-term future, and then we're going to take a longer look out. So briefly about us. Omgivning is a Swedish word that means the way a space feels. Our goal is to breathe new life into spaces, buildings, and to communities. We're an integrated architecture and interior design firm specializing in the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. We have a large range of project types, anything from office to hotels, restaurants, bars, multifamily, retail, and more. We work on, for example, a small local cafe where we'll do pretty much everything architecture and interior design. We'll even design custom furniture and light fixtures, branding, even down to the menus that they hand to the customer. So projects like that, all the way up to a 2 million square foot historic landmark. We specialize in taking old, sometimes abandoned buildings and converting them into new spaces, like mixed use housing or a commercial community. We started in 2009, and since then we have touched over 400 buildings. At Omgivning, we are placemakers and creative problem solvers. I apologize, knew that was going to happen. So our approach to what we do is perhaps best described as macro to micro. So on the macro scale, we're very community oriented. So think on the level of a city, a neighborhood. We're highly engaged in advocacy efforts and working with the city and agencies to change codes and create new policy to facilitate neighborhood growth. We want to always be a catalyst for positive change that improves the places that we live. We are urbanists. We always want to understand the community, then step down to the street level, and then to the building itself. It's really important to us to understand and emphasize how it all interconnects. So that's the macro. And on the micro scale, it's all about the human experience for us. We are humanists. We focus on all of the little details and elements that fundamentally make our experience of the way a space feels. Things like lighting, color, texture, the details that go into custom furniture, historic elements. All of these things can have an enormous impact on the way we experience our lives. We place strong emphasis on human-centered design, design that considers everything that people need for optimal health and wellness and to thrive. So that's the broad view of who we are and our approach. So let's talk about the future of the workplace. First, I think it's important to recognize that our working styles had already been changing. We all know this in all the ways that we're broadly aware of: generational shifts, changing values, obviously technological advancements. Our approaches to work had been shifting. That being said, working remotely was still really more the exception rather than the rule. So prior to the pandemic, the personal workspace was shrinking and had been for a long time. It was about getting the maximum number of workstations that could fit into a space with just a few private offices. And I think most people would agree that it was problematic at times. There was already starting to be a culture of headphones in order to focus, and people were tuning out. Phone calls were often an issue, and so some offices were installing phone booths for privacy when making a call, but issues persisted nonetheless. So when COVID happened, we suddenly found ourselves at the start of the pandemic in this new reality, like everybody, trying to work from home and just seeing your coworkers on a computer screen. These are some of our colleagues. We, as you can see, we're also big fans of pets at Omgivning. Sorry, I'm still. So COVID obviously accelerated and it amplified all of these shifts that had slowly been taking place over time, but on a massive scale. Up until that point, companies had been largely hesitant to adopt work from home policies, as there was generally seemed to be a lack of clarity around accountability and how and if the work would get done. There was a lot of hesitancy, but suddenly, as we all know, the world was forced into this global experiment in remote work. Now it's broadly understood that working remotely can and does work. It wasn't, and it still isn't perfect, but work continued to get done. So when the pandemic started, we did a lot of research and then an internal workshop and a design charrette to think about where we had already been going and how the pandemic was going to change things. We studied 3 categories: workplace, multifamily, and underutilized commercial spaces, which we called urban reprogramming. We looked at real life spaces, many of which are buildings that are projects that we're actually currently working on. We integrated the concepts and wrote comprehensive reports on how the ideas could be manifested and seen in the future in real spaces. So what did we learn? Across the various project types and studies, there were 4 consistent themes revealed that can help us understand what's next and guide us moving forward. The consistent themes and takeaways that we identified: the first, prioritization of human-centered design. So I briefly mentioned that before. If there's anything that recent events have underscored for all of us, I think it's what all humans need, not just to survive, but to thrive. That's become suddenly critically important in our awareness. We're going to see an increased focus on the principles of human-centered design moving forward. That means, to name a few things, design that is focused on facilitating mental and physical well-being, connecting people to nature, a balancing of socialization and privacy, and design that supports and encourages interpersonal connections, just to name a few. The second theme is that flexibility and adaptability are going to be crucial to our success, to everybody's success. Spaces especially need to be flexible and adaptable to accommodate different uses. I'm going to be showing you examples of what this can look like in some different iterations in just a bit, but essentially it comes down to demanding greater resilience from our buildings and our spaces. Circumstances change, and we may have different needs for the way a space functions, but that doesn't mean that we have to tear everything down and start all over. The way to approach this is by looking at a space through the lens of how it can be flexible and adaptable to meet our changing demands. So third, from mixed use to blended use, especially in large metropolitan areas like Los Angeles or the Bay Area, mixed use buildings have been quite common. When I say mixed use, I mean buildings that accommodate multiple needs in a single structure. So for example, a building that has retail on the ground floor and apartments or condos on the upper floors, that's mixed use. Prior to the pandemic, there had been an evolution from mixed use to blended uses, which again has only been supercharged since the pandemic began. Blended use spaces are those that can serve multiple functions simultaneously in a single space rather than necessarily a whole structure. An example illustrating this idea is, for example, a restaurant where you can dine and you can also work if you need to, and you can also buy some groceries while you're there too. This theme is about recognizing how a space can serve several purposes simultaneously. And lastly, the fourth item, or theme rather, is a space is inextricable from its economic context. This is about the recognition that economic context must be acknowledged and considered in how we design and use our spaces. Economic context obviously has a broad impact, from designing spaces where a high quality of life is more attainable to more people, to the changes that businesses must make in response to an economic downturn, for example. I'll show you some examples of this theme as well in just a bit. Today's spaces must facilitate different models like cost sharing and revenue generation. And I'll also show you some examples of that momentarily. And now that I've taken you through each of these themes, I think it's important to consider some ways of thinking about them. Where is this headed and what does it look like? I want to start off by saying our purpose here in this talk is to introduce some broader ideas and take you through how these themes may give you some approaches in thinking about your specific business or workplace or particular context, and perhaps use some of these ideas in contemplating how you might want to move forward or what's ahead, or these can just be ideas to inspire you to consider and to perhaps think of the future a little bit differently. Ultimately, there is no one right way to approach how we adjust and move into the future. All of the ideas in this talk allow for interpretation. Every business and workplace is highly specific with its own specific demands, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach to addressing them. These are just some ideas to consider as we move forward. So the global remote work experiment revealed both benefits and drawbacks of the work from home model, as we know. So this is an opportunity to ask, what's working? What isn't, and perhaps what wasn't really working that well before, if we think about it. We can take this moment of reflection to improve both individual work experiences and the way companies can grow and operate in this new era. Though there are many aspects of what's worked and what hasn't worked so well over this giant remote work experiment, there are just two that I want to highlight today as being critical to understanding some of the changes and changed expectations that we're seeing now and we will see in the future. Almost unilaterally across every study and survey globally, the number one benefit of working from home that employees cited from their experience was lack of commute. That's unsurprising for all the reasons that you might expect. This time was freed up in people's days, allowing them choice of how they wanted to spend it. It meant increased personal flexibility and a greater sense of agency over one's own time, as opposed to the limitations imposed by a traditional office workday. Also, nearly unilaterally, as well as globally, the number one drawback people reported was a lack of connection and a sense of isolation. Inability to connect and collaborate with one's coworkers left people largely feeling disconnected. And long-term, companies should note that a sense of disconnection or dissatisfaction with one's work from home situation has a direct correlation with decreased engagement and productivity in study after study. So while there's pros and cons to both the traditional office and working from home, this experience is really underscored the critical role that the office still plays. Though companies may have been successfully getting some types of work done remotely and over video, teams are still struggling with the generative work that creates new ideas and can solve complex problems. There's an intrinsic human experience of working together that fosters creativity, agility, and innovation that organizations need to be truly productive and grow. The good news is that it doesn't have to be either or in the future. We're getting there. We can take what worked, lose what didn't, and forge new approaches to work in a hybrid model. So over the past couple of days, you've heard the term hybrid work discussed quite a bit. Hybrid is synonymous with flexible. It means some may work on some days, others may come into the office only for specific meetings or collaborative sessions. It's going to be highly specific to the company, to the kind of work that needs to get done and the preferences of the individuals doing that work. So the concept of the office now takes new meaning and value from the traditional office structure and experience. Instead of a place that you go to work regardless, the office is now defined by its purpose. What is the reason that, or incentive that you have for going there? Think of the office as a magnet now, a place to collaborate, to strengthen relationships, to teach, to train, to mentor, to build community, your company culture, a shared sense of purpose, all of these things that have either been lacking or been lost over the past year plus of separation. Additionally, the office is still separate from home for focus, quiet time if you need it. Everyone's situation is different, and I'm thinking of parents specifically for whom being at home does not equate necessarily focus ability. So I want to be clear about that. You can still go to the office to focus if that's what you need. In reviewing the findings and assessments from multiple sources that have conducted research, some of which had already been researching this shift prior to the pandemic, but especially since the pandemic started, the consistent result is that we can expect about 2/3 of office workers to go hybrid. The flexibility of a hybrid working style has been increasing in popularity and employee expectations of their workplace going forward. The hybrid approach will be permanent. It will become the new normal. Company expectations of the future of hybrid work have been shifting as well, which I think it's important to note. There's not really a disconnect between what employees are expecting and leadership. When surveyed in September of 2020, a much higher percentage of leaders reported a shift in attitudes and expectations from just months prior. That number went up significantly. So hybrid is happening. And a hybrid model means that the needs of the office change. And with those changes, we need to modify how we think about using our space. So how do we think through potential ways of modifying our spaces in order to illustrate for you how we can think about changing our existing office space to meet the new demands of a hybrid workforce and its flexible scheduling? I'd like to walk you through some office concept plans that, yes, reflect the 4 consistent themes of what future spaces will require, as I previously discussed. So quick recap: human-centered design, flexibility, blended use, and considering your economic context. Okay. So I'm going to, pardon me, I'm going to walk you through some office concept plans and show you how we can adjust them to meet an office's different needs using 3 key design concepts. And again, remember, every office's approach is going to be different depending on their needs and their expectations of a hybrid schedule. And these concepts are flexible to address that. I'm just going to briefly introduce you to these 3 concepts and then show you how each of these concepts can be applied across a variety of spaces, and what that might look like in the physical space of an office. So the 3 key design concepts that we're going to talk about today are flexibility and adaptability, sensing a theme there, zoning your spaces, and leveraging your existing spaces. I'm going to take you through each concept one by one, and each will look different, even though they're all starting with the same base conceptual office model, which I'm going to show you here. So as you can see, it's a pretty typical, oh, sorry, that keeps happening. So as you can see, it's a pretty typical model of a common, mostly open concept office with some private offices along here. There's a reception area and some tables around which small groups can gather and collaborate, but it's largely laid out to accommodate the maximum number of workstations, individual workstations. So that's the base model that we're considering today. And as we previously discussed, this kind of office presents some consistent challenges: noise, distractions, lack of privacy, etc. So without adjustments, this kind of model just doesn't really work very well for what we need now. So the first design concept that we're going to discuss is flexibility and adaptability, and show you how that can work. With hybrid, we've identified that spaces need to be flexible and adaptable to serve a variety of needs on demand. People need collaborative and gathering spaces for meetings, and they also sometimes need individual focus spaces where they can do the heads down work without distractions. But virtual meetings are not going to be going away. And staff also need a place where they can have virtual meetings without disturbing others, and it's quiet for them as well, so they can concentrate. A flexible and adaptable solution to change this space is by introducing small offices, or pods, as we generally call them, pods. The pod is an exemplar of the concept of flexibility. It can have a variety of uses: private and focused for one person, or it can be adaptable to open up to accommodate a small group meeting, what we're referring to as the meeting pod. And if you're wondering, like, wait a minute, if you have a constantly changing flow of people in the office on any given day, how do you ensure that those who are in the office have a place to do the work that meets their needs that day? And this is where many companies use what's referred to as hoteling, which is essentially just reserving a pod or a meeting space when you know you're going to be in the office and you'll need to do some focused work with acoustic privacy or collaborative work. There are many digital reservation systems, much like how we would reserve conference rooms before the pandemic when we knew we had a meeting coming up. So as you can see, there are a variety of different models and the ways to use these small, either built-in booths or modular pods. And the wonderful thing about pods is that they can be rearranged to adjust the office layout as needed. So back to this conceptual office layout, you can see, this is the one that we started with right here. You can see how some workstations have been removed because not all employees are in the office all day long now. And so that space is freed up. And that allows for various types of pods to be utilized for people's specific needs and preferences when they're in the office. So as you can see, there are certain pods here that are open pods where people are still connected to what's happening in the office. There are still individual workstations. There are meeting pods for collaboration, and it can all be rearranged based on the demands of an office, and that might change over time. The second concept has to do with zoning a space by activity. Think of zones of an office based on the activity to take place there, or the purpose of that area. It's going to be a dedicated purpose. So for example, here's an example of a traditional concept office layout where we've overlaid with bubbled zones by activity or use, and then modeled in the furniture layout with pods. So notice where workstations previously would have been. So what I'm going to point out here is that on the initial concept model that was first presented, there were more individual workstations, for example, like in this area. But because we don't need as many individual workstations, we now have space to put in different types of pods in different areas based on what that area is geared for. If people need to be focused and it needs to be acoustically quiet, or if there's going to be collaboration or socialization, you designate areas of the office based on what people are going to be doing there. The third concept is going to be leveraging your existing spaces, rethinking your existing space. But instead of typical office programming based on desks or maximizing occupancy, because the hybrid workforce will not require as many desks and square footage, layouts will shift to meet those flexible needs. And an increased portion of employees who will be remote part of the time will just come to the office for specific purposes and activities. So 3 concepts in considering ways to leverage your existing space depending on your specific business needs. There are 3 models. There's the revenue generation model, gathering spaces, and shared spaces. And again, I'll explain each one by one. Revenue generation model, for example, this office has a reduced need for workstations, but say the business wants to utilize some of that now freed up space to help their bottom line. Reprogramming or repurposing those now freed spaces to generate additional income by subleasing to others, like for an art studio, a workshop. There's a myriad different number of purposes that people could utilize and sublease a space. And an added benefit of this type of a model is that it kind of creates a more dynamic and creative environment for employee experience when they're in the office. There's the gathering model. So this is a concept tailored to an office where most people are remote, but come in for meetings, culture, amenities, the social aspect. They come in just for the in-person contact, but all the other work is done at home. This is the model that can probably best be understood as the magnet model, if you will, drawing people together based on their shared purpose. I think it's easier to think of it more as almost like an amenity space for employees and clients that can serve functions of a traditional office space on demand. So this layout includes a variety of rooms for different uses: meetings, collaboration, workshops, trainings, events, social spaces, in addition to the smaller focus spaces like offices or pods. So for example, you can see these are the kinds of areas, and again, you can use the hoteling method to reserve these spots when people know that they're going to be coming in, and maybe between meetings, they'll need a place to do some work where it's quiet. But these areas are dedicated. There's the formal reception, enclosed workspaces, some phone booths, large meeting rooms, that kind of thing. So again, you can use hoteling as a management system for efficient company workflow. And then there is finally shared spaces. So shared is essentially, it's shared by you and another tenant. You have your private office space. So that would be like reflected in this color here, tenant 1, and they have their private office space in this kind of rust color. And some areas are common and shared by both tenants. So for example, the outdoor patio, the kitchen, social areas, that kind of a thing, they're shared between the tenants. So that brings us to sort of a bigger idea, and it's just one idea, but it happens to be one of our future visions we're actually in the process of planning and developing our future office. And we asked ourselves, what could this look like further into the future, beyond the near term, putting our understanding of these larger concepts and ideas into practice in another way. So here's our vision for the future office that we're developing. Again, it's just one way that a potential future might look for others down the road as well. This is a bigger idea for your imagination. I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, they need to make this happen. No, they don't. This is our personal project, but it is an idea that's really applicable, we think, to a variety of industries and companies moving forward. This vision builds on the concepts and considerations that we've just gone through. Multiple recent studies show that the #1 desire coming out of this pandemic is to be able to engage on a personal level, human connection. We've all heard that. Understanding the concepts and considerations that we've already discussed, a reduced need for traditional individual workstations, people move more flexibly, economic context, a renewed appreciation for our health and well-being, the benefits of a human-centered design. How do we envision a workplace that addresses these concerns while also creating a larger shared community? The essential idea is built and expanded on the shared model that I just mentioned. It's not a private office. It's not a co-working office. It's a bit of a blend. There are individual tenant spaces and there are shared or common amenity spaces or common spaces. And so this model creates a community that also meets our needs for public and private spaces. So how does it work? I'm going to show you a site plan and a case study that we used as we were thinking through how this future office would work. Each tenant has their own company space. So primarily, it's a space for their workstations, a few offices, some pods, their particular business. So as you can see here, this would be an example of one tenant's private space, another tenant, another tenant, another tenant. They all have their own private spaces. And then common areas that are shared between the tenants, a variety of conference rooms, kitchen, coffee bar, lounge, outdoor spaces, an IT hub that is shared, and other amenities. I mean, basically, you could use your imagination to come up with what a community like this might appreciate as a perk coming to a campus like this, if you will. An operations staff member would handle scheduling for those amenities that required them, like conference rooms. They would handle maintenance, management, upkeep. So what's great about this model and why is it beneficial? Each company has autonomy where it's most critical and can plan and utilize their private workspace and their office as aligned with their specific business model, their company culture, and their vision. And practically speaking, this means reduced overhead cost. for companies. So this is a typical plan for a building such as this that would be for just a single tenant. And one of the things to note here and understand is that amenity spaces, the shared spaces like the indoor outdoor patio, the kitchen, the conference rooms, that kind of thing, they're generally the most expensive parts of tenant improvement or build out. So sharing these common spaces means lower shared cost and an increased ability to be agile in response to changing business or economic conditions, which we know can turn on a dime. It lowers the barrier for entry for those looking to start or grow their business. It also allows larger companies who are looking to have multiple locations or satellite locations. They can have smaller groups of employees spread out regionally for work and have the ability to all come together as a full office in a larger conference room for like a weekly or monthly meeting or quarterly gatherings. And last but not least, this creates a sub-community through thoughtfully arranged co-tenancies. Leaseholders can capitalize on their space while also opening themselves up to the potential of future collaborations with like-minded firms, meeting like-minded people. It's all about community and, again, connection. All of this while reducing their monthly financial burden and improving their bottom line. So in conclusion, this is like, I'm sorry, I accidentally skipped this, I apologize. So this would be a new typical tenant test fit plan. So this is just, again, another example of what that personal individual tenant space would look like. And in the blue is all the shared common areas between the different tenants. So in conclusion, the past year has put everyone through quite a lot, to put it mildly, and the constant and rapid changes can easily feel daunting and overwhelming sometimes. I know I feel that way. Our hope at Omgivning is that while we're facing these challenges, that we can also take a small step back to consider the opportunities revealed here, the opportunity to address maybe wasn't working so well before, the opportunity to consider some new ways of thinking and find some inspiration for what we can create in our businesses and in our lives moving forward. The theme of this conference is natural evolution. And our hope for you is that in considering these broader themes discussed here today, like human-centered design, flexibility, adaptability, blended uses, and considering the economic context at all times, how they can be applied to your current space or your future space, that you feel empowered to make shifts, either small or large, and evolve in ways that feel workable and right for you, your business, and your team. This will be, as aptly titled, an evolution. It will continue to be an evolution. It's going to be a process that is ongoing and fluid. We think that these concepts can help in guiding your thinking, perhaps, about ways to adapt and move forward into the future. Thank you very much.
Hi, Brianne. This is Rebecca, and somebody posted in the chat a question. This is the last one that came up about, do we help employers measure the impact of their total employee commute, perhaps using greenhouse gas reduction of fewer employees coming to the work site every day for purposes of their sustainability goals?
I think that's an excellent question. And specifically, I was interested in this when I was considering talking to you guys specifically as a group in the Bay Area, because I used to live in the Bay Area, and one of my best friends, he still lives there, he's a journalist. And so I called him and asked, you know, him to tell me about what's been happening with transportation around the Bay Area. And he filled me in on, you know, all of the different things that have either been, have continued or have decreased schedules, like the ferry, they've limited days, that kind of thing. I think that with respect to planning an office that has, you know, co-tenancies, obviously, I think that's a really critical thing to consider when you're planning perhaps a new site or moving your office. The commute is critically important, especially in a place like the Bay Area, because people are traveling from so many different areas that don't seem that far away, but it can be quite a haul. So I think, you know, again, it's about being able to step back and look at the big picture, about your company as a whole, where you're going, what your goals are, thinking about bigger things like sustainability and how to, you know, lower our collective carbon footprint, and also just and thinking smaller scale as well about what works for your specific workforce, and what having satellite locations or a smaller office that people are more flexibly moving in and out of can mean for them.
Brianne, there was a similar question posed about when you work with clients, how much of your plans also include, you know, talking about the parking and the transportation needs when you do designs?
Well, that's, I mean, again, that's an interesting thing about, and this is part of, I mean, at no point do I ever wish, or I think any of us wish to be like, think of oneself as like an oracle or omniscient. I mean, the thing about this that is so exciting, but is also so challenging and frustrating, is that it is fluid and that it's going to continue to evolve. But what it does mean, I would think, is that the traffic patterns and the parking allocation that we once could reliably plan for and need to plan for in terms of, you know, city code clearances for parking, that kind of thing, we're gonna, I mean, I think it's gonna remain to be seen over a little bit of time. And I realize that might be a slightly not very satisfying answer, but there's a lot of unknown. I mean, I don't need to tell you, there's a lot of unknowns right now. But I think long term, it's clear that it's the standard 9 to 5 driving the commute every day, that is going to change. And I think over you know, the further into the future we go, the more that shift is going to be even wider. So.
Here's another question, Brianne. I'm wondering how the workspaces you introduced us to can be easily modified for offices that need to scale up or down. I find that traditional leases force us into standard fixed office size for X number of years, and that really limits how you can scale.
Yeah. So I think two things about that. I think on the one hand, I think the real estate market, especially commercial, is fully aware and paying very close attention and clearly understands that they are needing to rethink some things, and the traditional approaches to the, you know, multi-year leases, and, you know, you have to take this amount of square footage, and, you know, that's changing, and they know that. And that's, you know, again, they're gonna continue to evolve as well in real estate, just as companies and businesses are gonna have their needs change and need to be more fluid. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that I would refer back to is that, say you do have a potential lease space, and trying to fit it out and see, well, okay, this is too much space for us. It's about stepping back and considering, well, if we don't need all of this space necessarily, what can we do to leverage the space that, let's say you have this space, it's part of the lease and you have to do it, or you're doing it one way or the other. How can you leverage that space to be creative and think about what else can this space be used for? What other purpose can it serve? How can this space make money and help pay the rent every month if we sublease or utilize it for a different purpose? So I think it's kind of a two-pronged thing. And again, it's going to be fluid, which I realize I sound like a broken record in that regard, but I kind of feel like everybody is to a certain degree. Did I need to clarify anything or miss anybody's question, or is there anything else that you just are curious about? I'm happy to speak to any of that if anybody's curious.
Okay, so here's another question. Well, now they're coming in fast and furious. Building departments in cities requiring transportation demand management plans to mitigate solo occupancy driving. What changes are you seeing with city requirements for new buildings? And Brianne, maybe I'm wondering if you want to reference how in downtown Los Angeles they're doing away with required parking.
Correct. And I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the first part of that question clearly. I'm wondering if you can repeat it.
Yeah, with regards to development and cities requiring a transportation plan, how are we helping to mitigate solo occupancy driving?
Yeah, so again, a few prongs. One, much like real estate, I think cities as a whole, and in terms of city planning, they're also reeling and trying to figure things out. And a lot of cities, I mean, to varying degrees, but as Rebecca just mentioned, downtown Los Angeles has really become much more flexible. They've also been repurposing some public spaces that were otherwise utilized as parking. So here in Los Angeles, more coastal, so like Santa Monica, the West Side area, a lot of parking has been reallocated by the city to enable restaurants and small businesses to extend their storefront or restaurant out into the street, so that people can have social distancing and access to open air. Secondly, I would say it's important to, if you are in a position to work with an architect or a space planner that has relationships with people in the city, who, an expediter or somebody who has their finger on the pulse of exactly what kinds of conversations are being had and maybe what's just around the horizon, being aware of what city planning meetings are happening, and making a point of paying attention to what conversations are being had there. And often I feel like there's updated information coming out as people are constantly adjusting in this fluid environment. I feel like the situation is changing rapidly. So it's one of those things that I think is pretty specific to, if you're in Alameda County versus San Francisco proper, there's going to be different requirements and ordinances. But again, it's evolving quickly. I'm seeing, do you have any suggestions for flexible furniture systems? And I'm not entirely sure what specifically, if there's one specific purpose for a flexible furniture system that you have in mind, but Suggestions for so that's the beauty of a flexible furniture system. Not to sound so hokey, but they really can. It's remarkable what is possible with a furniture system company that understands space and the way their different products work together, and the different componentry that different people can use for the way that they do their specific work. If you're on a team that does X type of job, you're going to have needs for a different type of a workspace. And again, back to pods. I mean, I'm a little bit bummed that I couldn't include about 1 million different photos that would blow your mind and inspire you about the different ways that pods can be utilized and space can be rearranged and just, I mean, again, just it's so flexible. So I would just say, yeah, I mean, this is perhaps a dissatisfying answer, but really, I feel like the sky's the limit when it comes to, you know, flexibility in furniture systems, and then specifically right now with the development that we're seeing with pods and, you know, acoustical, you know, being able to muffle acoustics, to be connected with AV, so you can have virtual meetings, to have privacy. There's, you know, to expand, to like literally open and expand and change the formation of the pod to accommodate, you know, anything from a focused single person to a small group of 4 people. So I don't know.
I can help clarify my question.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I was thinking about those examples you had shown, you know, making a space more flexible, be able to use for multiple purposes. And maybe because what we have right now are more like traditional modular furniture. So, you know, to even redo it, there's like a cost associated with, you know, it gets very easily very expensive, you know, just redoing it. So I was curious if, I don't know if there are certain companies or I don't know, any suggestions on if it's even possible. Are there systems out there where they're more flexible and easy to move around? I don't know, as like groups change, if we want a more collaboration style, you know, pod versus then, you know, doing a different style, you know, a bullpen or whatever, you know, just is there a better option than going back to the furniture vendor, having to pay them, you know, to redesign it and then redo the
like the whole thing.
Yeah,
kit and caboodle.
Yeah, it's just such a big effort.
Yeah, it is, and an expense, and that's not a small thing.
So do you see that as the future where it is something? Is it becoming more flexible? Have you seen where are there companies where, you know, maybe it, you know, like we can do it ourselves? It doesn't have to be this whole thing.
Oh, you mean as opposed to like a full service kind of high-end luxury thing? So there's a couple of things I'll say off the top of my head. One, you know, I would be interested to consider what are, you know, your current workstations, how they're set up, and what you need them to be able to do. So in what ways they need to be adjusted. And I'm a lot of, I mean, every furniture company right now, especially in, you know, system furniture, are developing all kinds of new things for this new future where it is going to be required to be flexible and adaptable. So I'm this is off the top of my head, but I'm wondering if there is, you know, not a need to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but see if that specific vendor has particular components that they can sell and that you can incorporate in the way that meets the need that you need it to meet, or Or, I think it's worth looking at the wider market. I mean, and again, not knowing your space, not knowing, all the specifics, there are also furniture vendors that are not quite so, high end, like you said, full service. There, like one that comes to mind is Poppin. They, have a lot of options that are much more economical approach, but they're also, fun and well designed. And so I don't know what the situation is specifically, and how you might be able to tweak it given what you have. But off the top of my head, I mean, it's worth exploring.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for the question.
Brianne, I think we can take just one final question. There's one in the chat about, do you foresee any sizable fixed cost savings for businesses and employers?
Long term?
I don't know if Kelly.
I mean, I think it depends on what their office and lease model is, how they're, see, here's the thing, is that every business, every business and their various teams, it depends on you considering what work are they specifically doing? How does that work that they do get done? Are there specific teams that work in one way and need to be more on site, or versus others that who can work more remotely, and therefore you don't need as much, space, fixed costs, that kind of thing. That's one thing. And the challenge, and I think, again, this is where it gets really highly specific, is finding that balance between, what your company goals are, what the work is that you do, how the work gets done, and then what the preferences of, and, working styles of your team actually are. It's a bit of a balancing act. It's tough for everyone right now, and there's no easy answer right now, unfortunately, but I think it's a matter of, again, back to the macro and the micro, looking at larger picture, looking at what your conditions are, what your, long-term commitments are, fixed cost wise, that kind of thing. And then what are the specific needs, day to day and in shorter increments, monthly, quarterly, that kind of thing.
Well, thank you so much, Brianne. This was a very rich presentation, and I think what I would take away from it is, you had some really great concepts, and I wouldn't underestimate the simplicity of what it means for an employer to ask what worked and what didn't. I think it takes a lot of bravery and honesty to really ask questions like that of our organizations, as well as what is needed. And I think we kind of got this like shock of an experience to say, oh, actually, maybe some things weren't needed.
Maybe it wasn't working so well.
And to, emerge real things that actually, wow, we actually really need some things that we did not have.
Yeah.
So I really want to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, sometimes those are tough. They can be tough things to consider, or like hard conversations to have with oneself or with your team, like what wasn't working. And, but I think those are also necessary if you want to get to a place you've never been before. And that's part of the exciting part of it. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, totally. And I think, now's the time for folks in transportation and TDM to really pioneer and champion things and new initiatives, and what that will mean. This conversation is going to continue. I mean, it is by no means, this is going to be a long haul conversation of how our workplaces are changing. So thank you very much for your presentation.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having us. It's such a joy.
And I want to thank all of our attendees for being engaged, and that we will be following up with recordings of the presentations and how to keep in touch with Commute.org. Also want to give huge thanks to our partners. Spare the Air team has always been a really great partner on our events. And as well as this year, SHRM has also, the HR Managers Network has also been of great help to us in organizing this event. We'll also be putting out a survey link in the chat right now to get your feedback on how the presentations were for you. And also look out for follow-up communication from us about what is next from Commute.org, and really appreciate everybody's engagement and participation. So thank you very much. And happy Earth Day to all.
Thank you very much.